An often used apologetic argument is the one about documentary evidence and claims for a vast number of existing ancient New Testament manuscripts. The argument is usually presented as a stark contrast between the skimpy number of manuscript copies we have of other ancient writers and the bountiful supply of New Testament material that exists in Greek, Latin, Coptic, Syriac, and other ancient languages. It's said that if we are prepared to accept the authenticity of Homer's Iliad, Caesar's Gallic Wars, the histories of Josephus, etc., on their very slender manuscript record, then how much more we should accept the plentifully attested New Testament claims. If we reject such a huge body of New Testament material, then ancient history itself becomes untenable, because there would be no reliable evidence of anything. The trap is then snapped shut by the argument that with the New Testament material, the time elapsed between the events and the manuscripts themselves is only a few years, whereas with much ancient literature, the earliest extant copies are centuries later than the events described. So who can possibly challenge the reliability of the Gospels? Game, set and match for Jesus? Or is it? This manuscript evidence claim, though slick and often reiterated, can be described as a numbers racket, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, it is true that there are several thousand early Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, over 5,000 in fact. But pause for a moment. How early is early? Nearly all of those manuscripts, and I mean above 99%, date from the 4th century or later. Some are as late as the 16th century. Now, what is significant about the 4th century? Well, that was the century in which the Christian religion became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and the pagan religions were declared treasonable and punishable by death. That was the century in which the Christians started to burn the libraries of the ancient world and the books of their opponents. That was the century when Christian scribes also began to produce luxurious copies of the New Testament under state patronage and at state expense. For example, the Codex Sinaiticus, the earliest complete New Testament, is thought to be one of 50 copies ordered by Constantius, one of the sons of Constantine, the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity. To say that a Christian empire produced hundreds of copies is no more convincing of the truth than to say that in Nazi Germany, Hitler's Mein Kampf was also a bestseller produced by the million. Yet even with that sort of backing of the Roman state, the New Testament texts themselves altered through time, through copyist errors and because of doctrinal refinement, at a rate estimated at 1% per century. That is to say, after 500 years, the manuscripts were 5% different, and after 1,000 years, 10% different from their original 4th century sources. No other ancient literature has been modified in this way. But no matter how many copies were produced or how accurately the text might have been preserved, the elephant in the room is the void of those dark centuries before the 4th century. That period of time between supposed holy happenings in the 1st century and our earliest copies of the stories. We know from the fortuitous survival of material recovered from a rubbish dump at Nag Hammadi in Egypt that those early centuries were characterized by ferocious doctrinal arguments and fiercely competitive claims and rival stories. We also know that the scribes of this time were not professional copyists, but partisan fanatics themselves, and that changes both deliberate and accidental were least likely to be checked or noticed. In other words, in the earliest period, the New Testament material was most fluid and contentious. But what do we have from those first 2 centuries? Certainly not one original document. We have fragments of papyrus, about 60 of them, the most famous being the so-called P52 Rylands fragment, about the size of a credit card, with 5 complete and 9 part words on one side and 6 complete and 7 partial words on the other. And if we imagine 79 missing words, we can find a corresponding passage in John's Gospel, chapter 18. What makes this fragment important is the supposed very early date, the earliest of all Gospel or New Testament fragments. Now you might wonder how this is dated, and dating of this scrap is based on handwriting alone. From the supposed writing style apparent from such a small sample of words, the mid-2nd century is suggested for its origin, plus or minus 25 years, though comparable handwriting has been found over a much wider time frame. Experts today extend the possible dates of P52 into the late 2nd and even early 3rd century. So what does this say about the much touted vast documentary evidence? It all boils down to a mass of later state propaganda and the familiar paper trail that runs out somewhere in the 2nd century.